the book was my view to get to understand Gen Z better. And of course, I wrote it out. In 2022, I then launched the podcast. Just simply because I saw that there was a huge demand and there was a huge curiosity on Generation Z. And therefore, every company today it was grappling with something or the other with that generation. How do you bring them on? How do you hold them on? How do you motivate them? How do you... and so I think in my podcast, learned so many things about that generation. And I think from that was the extension to write more about multi-generations, because I think it wasn't just the Gen Z which were causing or becoming the focal point. It's the boss and their bosses, and how does that whole multi-gen ecosystem come into play. So that's what is my second book. Honestly, I only say this with a lot of humility. I don't know if I'm an expert, but I think I've learned a lot about that generation from the book, from the podcast, and then doing a lot of works and talks on the topic. Generation differences have always existed, and over time they have always also worked out. It's not that it just kind of goes two different ways. So a lot of the parallels of what we see in our personal life also kind of happens in the work life. And I think there are 2 or 3 scenarios that are happening, David. Number one, you're seeing more generations at the workplace, right? You're seeing a minimum of 3, possibly 4 generations right now. So you're seeing Gen Z, you're seeing millennials, you're seeing Gen X, and you're seeing possibly baby boomers also. And you're seeing them simply because boomers are working longer. Xers have a 15-year runway at least ahead of them. And so the millennials and the Gen Zs have at least 20 and then maybe 40, 50 years respectively, right? So there's a lots of sort of a mishmash coming together. And each generation has grown up and seen a different context, right? And I think that is fundamentally the root cause of how we see things, right? So one generation looked at bosses in a different way, organizations in a different way. So the value shaping in each generation have been very different. A lot of times we don't know what's sort of our calling, right? We think that, okay, I should be having a certain profession because it's going to give me more money, more prestige, and so on, right? And it's a process of self-discovery. And as I mentioned in my story, I was a fairly strong finance professional. I worked in Silicon Valley in the US and making good money. I probably would have made much more money on that track. But I think there is almost like for all of us who work long, there's kind of an existential question that comes like probably for 30s or 40s or whenever they say that, okay, what more do I do? I mean, do I continue to do this? Will I continue to just, get that next title and some people are very driven by that and they're happy with it. And quite frankly, when I did work in leadership, I wasn't doing it more it wasn't kind of, hitting me internally, but it did over a period of time. So when I saw more and more people getting changed in their careers, in their lives, I think there's a sense of satisfaction, there's a sense of joy, there's a sense of accomplishment. And I do believe that at some point in my career, I don't know, maybe from now, I don't want to devote as much time as I can in the leadership space and maybe some in spirituality, and not so much from a religious perspective, just from perspective to do good even more outside of the workplace, right? How do we help, by doing volunteer work for NGOs and so on, right? And at the end of the day, it's not the size of the paycheck which always gives you happiness, right? It's the quality of the work.